Welcome to part 3 of bacterial infections. I was going to do just 2 parts, but I enjoyed the first 2. Hopefully you did as well. That I wanted to do a third. There were a couple more I wanted to talk about. That being said, I don't know that this will definitely not be as graphic as it was yesterday. The viewer discretion is advised on this one. I think it's a little bit tamer. Try to tame it down a little bit. But these the diseases for today are going to be more of the respiratory nature. So we're going to start with the first one, which is whooping cough. Whooping cough is from a bacteria, pertussis bacteria. It's a gram-negative, and here is a term we haven't seen yet, but there's diversity even in the bacterial realm. Coccobacillus, which is kind of a hybrid between a rod and round, so it's kind of a hybrid in there. And the whooping cough is a bacteria that's going to infect your upper respiratory tract, and it gets into the cilia, which lines the trachea, which leads down to your lungs. And the cilia, the purpose of the cilia is to take any kind of dirt or dust from the lungs and kind of push it up from the lungs up into and out of the trachea, and it'll dump it down into the esophagus, or maybe you'll cough or sneeze it up. So these bacteria will get into this cilia. That's where they really kind of where they attach. Then here's a nice picture of the gram-negative. And they're kind of rotty, but not quite. Anyway, if you get infected with whooping cough, and you most likely will not since you're vaccinated against it, but it used to be a problem. What will happen is the bacteria here inhibit and damage the cilia. And as the cilia go away, die, or fall off, I don't know the exact mechanism, and as the lungs try to get rid of the dust and the dirt, the cilia aren't there, that ends up giving you the reflex of coughing. And this coughing can be severe, and it usually doesn't happen right away. The bacteria takes a little while for the bacteria to digest, or not digest, wrong word, but kind of destroy or damage the cilia they stop working. And what happens is you get these severe coughing fits where you cough so much the air is totally expelled out of your lungs. And when that happens, as your lungs are returning back to normal, you make the characteristic whooping sound. Kind of a high-pitched whoop, I guess. I've never heard it since most people are vaccinated against it, but that's where the term for whooping cough comes from, because the cilia have been damaged. You can't transport the dust and dirt out of your lungs, so you cough, and you can't stop coughing, and that leads to the expulsion of air, which then leads to this sound afterwards. The other thing that this toxin does is it inhibits the immune system. And that is a common theme with the bacteria I have today. I think the next one for sure. I think the last one as well. But the toxin also helps suppress the immune system, keeping it away. That's whooping cough. It's not very fatal at this point. You usually catch it, you get antibiotics, and you're good to go. And we're vaccinated against it, but it used to be a problem. Next one, which is still kind of a problem. But tuberculosis. Tuberculosis we are not vaccinated against. If you're vaccinated against tuberculosis, you always test positive for the tuberculosis test. It's an interesting little nugget. The other little interesting thing about tuberculosis is that it is a bacillus, rod-shaped bacteria, but it is neither gram-positive nor negative. It's got a different outer structure, kind of a waxy outer coating. So when you try to do the gram stain, it will turn up positive and negative. I don't know the conditions for either, but the gram stain does not work with tuberculosis. So it's one of the odd ones there. Tuberculosis is an infection of the lungs, and once it gets into the lungs, it gets into the alveoli again, kind of deep into the alveoli, and so you breathe it in. It gets lodged in the alveoli, and again, I find it kind of cool or neat how it does this, but the immune cells go to destroy it, And you have these immune cells that will engulf bacteria. So it gets engulfed by the bacteria, So the immune cells engulf this bacteria, and the bacteria ends up using that engulfing mechanism to allow it to give it conditions where it grows. And the bacteria the immune system thinks it's taking care of it, but in fact, what has happened is the bacteria has survived inside of this macrophage and is able to still divide. And ultimately what happens because of this, and these immune cells we'll call other immune cells, you end up with this kind of, it's called a granuloma, but it's like a cyst. And inside you have these bacteria cells, and outside you have these immune cells, and it's almost like pus. And over time you get the tissue inside here that's being surrounded gets necrotized or dies, and you end up with these kind of these white cheesy-like is what they describe it of structures of dead tissue in these immune cells. And if you can kind of imagine if you have tuberculosis and it's left untreated. This is somebody's picture that they drew of it. I decided not to pull up an actual picture of a lung for you guys. Spare you that. But you can see, you get the sense that when it's left untreated, you get all these granulomas in there. It's going to be hard to breathe, and it's going to lead, it's going to lead to bad things. And what will happen is you'll end up coughing. Right? So this causes you to cough. You cough it, and then, as you can see here, you cough it, gets in the air, and somebody else breathes in those nice bacteria cells. It can also get into the bloodstream. And when it gets in the bloodstream, that can also lead to go to other organs where the same thing happens, and you get this necrotized tissue, and it can get pretty bad, and you get all these granulomas everywhere. That's not good. But the necrotized tissue is bad. It's a slow progression. And just for historical perspective, this was, if you ever see consumption, this was called consumption. It used to be a really bad problem. But now we've got better ways to treat it, and you hear about a few cases every year, but it's not a huge deal for us anymore, unless you get it, I suppose. Not good. Don't want it. You want to breathe. All right, next one. I chose, just because you hear about it a lot, Lyme's disease. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgot to put this in here. This is the kind of a picture of the granuloma. So you have the macrophage area, and you got the necrotized tissue in here. You got the macrophages, or the immune cells, and you get this nice little cyst here. Anyway, it seemed like a better idea at the time when I put it in, I suppose. All right, Lyme disease. This is the only spirochete that we've encountered, but Lyme disease is a bacterial illness caused by ticks. Right, so it's a very slowly reproducing bacteria. I think it takes at least 24 hours for it to divide. So that's one reason why Lyme disease can be an issue, is you have this slow progression of symptoms, and they can go away sometimes. And it can take a long time for it to actually get bad, and by that time you maybe forgot you were infected with a tick. But this is the classic bullseye rash you can get with Lyme disease. So you get the tick that burrowed in here, a deer. It's usually the small deer tick. And the ticks will have this bacteria, and it gets into your body, and it starts to reproduce and develop. It doesn't affect ticks, and if I remember right, it has to do with the body temperature of ticks. I don't know what the temperature of a tick is, but it's lower, and then it gets into this Lyme disease bacteria, gets into humans, and it kind of activates it. It's a better growth medium for it to better temperature for it to live. But the progression of Lyme disease is fairly long. I think the flu-like symptoms actually don't start till a few weeks after your initial infection, and I think after the bullseye rash has gone away. And then a few weeks later, if you get to the third, the worst stage, it can and this Lyme disease will get into the bloodstream and can kind of move around. And it leads to heart problems and facial paralysis called Bell's palsy, where you get some of your facial muscles will be paralyzed, and you can't move your face, and you get these weird expressions on your face. And I suppose people will maybe not be nice to you. But it can lead to really bad problems. And anyway, it can be treated with antibiotics. And lastly, we have diphtheria, which is another bacterial disease that you are vaccinated against. It's a gram-positive rod, and the toxin from this virus will inhibit protein synthesis, which kills cells. It typically gets into the throat and the lungs, and here it produces this kind of gray-like coating. Oops. That's what happens. You click the mouse. You're not supposed to. This gray-like coating, and it just kind of thick coating that's kind of the what diphtheria is known for. Anyway, this inhibits protein synthesis, and if the cell can't produce proteins, it's going to die. I saw some pretty interesting pictures of swollen glands. They get pretty large with this. And I think the issue is with the getting into the respiratory tract again. One last thing before I let you go, I just remembered. It has to do with, I'm going to go back a slide if I can. It has to do with Lyme's disease. Lyme's disease, these bacteria can travel through the bloodstream. Kind of neat. They get into the blood vessels, and they just discovered this around 2016, and they'll attach to blood vessel walls, and then just kind of do a loop, or just kind of like almost like a jumping. I don't know. Just like a worm. They'll attach and then keep crawling. Oh man, that's stupid. And they'll slowly work their way up the bloodstream by attaching to the blood vessels and just doing kind of a slow crawl. One end will attach, and then the other one will attach, and then it will detach the next end and just kind of slowly work its way up. Anyway, I thought that was cool. All right, well, that's it. Tomorrow we're going to work on how we are not dead from bacteria. So how do we cure ourselves from all these infections going around? It's not as bleak as it seems. Enjoy your day.